Why would we want to gravitate to somebody who's literally telling people your humanity is worth shit? It makes no sense. We're not going to go run to that guy. Oh, thank you. You sound like a savior to me. I'm just a, eat the bugs. Who wants that? Like, I'm sure that there's a segment of the population that's always going to just kind of do whatever officialdom says is recommended, right? There's always that. But they are not the majority of people. If you ask the majority of people about some of these issues, they'll say the same thing we'll say. Oh, they're ridiculous. They're not. They might not live and breathe these issues like you and I do, But if cornered, if asked, they'll say, "Yeah, that's ridiculous." Disinformation governance board. Come on, most people will go, "Get out of here!" Like, just so stupid. Like, but they're doing it, and they're floating around her little stupid video with her Mary Poppins tune. What for? What end? Like you say, is it just to get us to be tackling each other? Roe v. Wade? I mean, you blew the dust off of that one for this. I mean, really? Like, I don't know.
All right, so this is John-Michael Dumais with Rise Up New Hampshire with my friend and colleague, Frank Natoli. We're looking at the live action role play, crash, whatever we're calling what's ever happening today. We're looking at what's happening, what people are saying is happening, what's behind what's happening. Is it really happening? For whose benefit is it happening? Certainly not for ours in most cases, but is it meant to bring us to another place to serve a different agenda? So it's another opportunity for us to look at paradigms lost and found and see what's going on. So welcome, Frank.
Hey, how you doing, JM?
Good. So before we were on, you were just telling me about a colleague of yours in Shanghai. So why don't you just pick it up there? Because I think it's just another interesting bit of news, and quite honestly, I haven't checked in for a bit on what's going on there. So what is going on there?
Yeah, so it's a client of mine, and I had an opportunity to do a teleconference from there. And when I realized she was in Shanghai, because it's a Hong Kong entity, but apparently she's living and residing in Shanghai, and a city I've been to a couple of times, by the way. It was at least a really great city at one time. But it was interesting because she was saying essentially, it is pretty much what we're hearing on the news. Everybody is locked down. Her perspective, well, first I know we just talked about this, but she kind of said to me, she stopped and hesitated, because it came up because she made mention that that they're quarantined, And we started saying, I was asking her, well, how has this been? I mean, is it like we're hearing in the news? And she stopped and she says, okay, I'll talk about it. Because she was hesitant. I said to her, listen, you talk about what you feel comfortable talking about. I don't want you to feel like, we have to have this discussion, of course. But she was okay with it. She says that, that where she is, she's lucky because she has a single family residence, so she has a yard that she's able to like move, but she can't go outside her yard. There are obviously a lot of people who have all kinds of food related issues and supply issues and all these kinds of things happening. But her perspective, I think, and she kind of intimated that this is sort of the general consensus. And Shanghai, for people who aren't familiar, is a very cosmopolitan international city, and has been for a very long time. And the flavor of individual in Shanghai is going to be different than perhaps other places, in the countryside of China, other localities there. Shanghai is a very sophisticated international place. People are definitely going to tend to be more sophisticated and more cosmopolitan. But she said that in her estimation, the CCP is in big trouble. I mean, the reason why they're doing this is not missed upon most of the population, particularly the more sophisticated, segments like Shanghai. The people are dumb. They know that we don't do this for a virus. This is ridiculous. I mean, just the fallout alone, the damage that's being done to individuals, families, children, elderly is just astronomical. I mean, anybody with any kind of big, degree of logic in their mind would know that people would take their chances with the freaking virus over being treated like this. It's insane. So that's not missed upon the people in China. So anybody's watching this news who's thinking like China's just a bunch of bots and they just yes, they Chinese people have been very tolerant of the encroaching surveillance state over the course of some years, largely because there was a net benefit for the Chinese population to do so. They've appreciated a certain economic ascendancy that has been realized by real families, average families, in ways in which they've never seen before in the history of China, right? You have people who are now an emerging solid middle class that comes with all of the attributes: a home ownership, owning a car, the ability to vacation, modern appliances, a lot of things that their parents never had, their grandparents certainly never had, and all the way down the line, going back 1,000 years, they finally feel that they've achieved some level of economic security, and they were willing to tolerate the encroaching surveillance uber police state of China as a result, right? So it's easier when things are going well. I mean, at the social credit system, it's easy to say to yourself, hey, I'm a good person. I do the right thing. I don't have to really worry about whether the government, sees me do X or Y. I'm not really breaking the laws. You go along with it. You're getting a net benefit. It's almost a quid pro quo. Well, that's waning, and is now actually reversing in speed. So the real-time events that China is circulating through, if you think of the United States as a base model, the Chinese are going through the same steps, only so much more rapidly, much quicker pace. Everything is sped up. And so they're already at the sort of end of that cycle. And the CCP, I think, recognizes their vulnerability here in very big ways, which explains why Xi Jinping is seizing all this power, and now he's basically, they changed the laws in China. So people who aren't familiar, the Chinese system's a little different. When we hear about things like elections, we have to understand that it's not Chinese people going to polls, electing individuals, and their vote is represented. It's not how it works, right? It's an election within the uber elite that get to elect other leaders, and Ping had changed the rules so that Xi had changed the rules rather so that he can be continuously reelected by the I guess it's the Politburos that have their votes. Right? So he can be basically leader for life. These are desperate power grabs in incredibly vulnerable times. I don't think there's a nation, quite frankly, maybe the United States comes close, that is more of a powder keg than China right now, just in terms of where they're at in their level of dealing with this. And the Chinese people are incredibly patient, forgiving people in that sense, but I don't think it's going to be long before that hits the fan.
Although I was curious as I was reading up on China over the past year to learn that they they are probably the country in the world that has the most insurrections or protests, from different groups and different people in different towns, different cities over the course of time. I mean, it just seems to not stop. Of course, now that's become a little bit more commonplace in the West for all the reasons that we're familiar with. Well, let's back this up and back it out a little bit to the kind of what's going on in the global financial markets, because this is often what we start with and often where we go. And it's obviously all about the control of resources, control of people. What was it that Kissinger said? You control the money, you control the oil, you control the food, you do control the people. And it's like, it does seem that they're marching in that direction. And we're seeing all kinds of stuff in the financial markets right now. What are you noticing of note over the last week or so? And is there something that's unexpected for you, or how do you look at it all with it right now?
I haven't seen anything that I'm really surprised at, to be honest. It seems as if it's a deflation of the market over doing it over incrementally. I think they're trying to staircase it down. We saw yesterday, for example, on the close. I mean, you had a down market throughout the day, and then all of a sudden, towards the end of that trading session, the plunge protection team jumps in, and yada yada yada. It's not as bad as it was today. The markets are up, gaining. Who's buying these dips? It's not the world's most knowledgeable and powerful. That's for damn sure. They're leaving in droves. Presumably they've gotten out already. So there are a lot of plays being made in these kinds of end stage markets where large monolithic power players will pull out, they'll drive out smaller retail investors, and then they come back in, driving the price back up and take appreciation of that VIG and the difference. But you might say that could be a play with Bitcoin as an example, maybe. Although at the end of the day, I think all things real will be in immense demand, and all things unreal will crash to the bottom of the ocean. I mean, I think at some point soon, that's not today or tomorrow, but soon, I think you're going to see an absolute panic out of the dollar.
So, I noticed that a lot of crypto markets are having a crash. I've always wondered about crypto, only because, and I think we've talked about this before, it doesn't seem to be a great a consistent store of value because it goes up and down so radically. I mean, what's really behind it, especially if people are using fiat money to buy it, or exactly what? And, can you make, do you have any commentary about crypto as a store of value versus blockchain as a possible way out of what's going on?
Well, I would contend that it's absolutely not a store of value. I think it's a speculative asset. I think it's entirely correlated. It's an entirely correlated asset to the equity markets, and more specifically to the tech sector of the equity markets. And it has been trading essentially in tandem with those markets, the ups and the downs, right? So that's not a good thing. I know it's sold sort of as a store of value. The people that push it tend to refer to it as digital gold. I mean, that's a huge oxymoron. You can't have digital gold, right? It doesn't work that way. I think personally, my fear is that it's been really a Ponzi scheme. I think it operates very much like a Ponzi scheme. It's the first in have benefited, and the people who, and I was just talking to a friend of mine last night. She got in Bitcoin at 60,000. That was the fear of missing out, right? You're hearing all the buzz, and you're in it. If you're in at 60,000, it went up to like 63, maybe a little more than that. Or I forget what that high was, 68 or something like that. But then, of course, it came right down. Almost half of all Bitcoin owned is underwater right now, and the margin threshold is about 21,000. So these players like Michael Sayer and this is a big problem. I imagine they're sitting on they're on eggshells right now, really not knowing where this is gonna, how this is gonna play out. Will there be opportunities to make money in it still? Maybe. Would I take that risk? Maybe, but I think you'd have to look at it like a risk. I think you'd have to assess it like I'm taking a risk, and it should be money that you have that you are absolutely willing to lose. In my opinion, this is not financial advice, right? But you have to be willing, I think, to part with it, not knowing. I mean, who knows where? I don't know where those triggers are in a space like cryptos. How do you know? I can tell you that when the panic sets in the clamoring for all things real, I don't envision seeing the money going to Bitcoin. I see the money going to gold and silver. There's only so much of that available, easily. Is this where we are right now? 29.9. We're still back under 30.
Yep. From a high of about looks like 67
right
on November 8th last year. This is the 1 year.
Yeah.
And of course you can see what's happened. So it's obviously it obviously went through a speculative frenzy starting in late 2020, and then it's been really up and down since then.
Yeah. I mean, a couple other things to note about Bitcoin too is that I think just from a general premise, I'm circumspect, right? It was created by somebody who we believe to be a fictional person, right? This Satoshi Nakamura, I think I said that right. We don't know if this person exists. Does he not exist? There's no images of him. There's no interviews with him. This is, folklore kind of stuff. Something's very, very sketchy about all that, especially something like a crypto quote currency. I mean, you would think that there would have to be some level of trust that you would put your name and your face on this, right? That all by itself makes me take pause and think something doesn't quite seem right, with this. Coinbase, by the way, has just announced, well, in their filings, so there's a fear of a bankruptcy there, and in their filings to the SEC, they mentioned that there could be a bail-in on cryptos. And then they tried to backpedal. Did you hear this, Jay? Did you hear about this? When they said, hey, listen, if we go down, guess what? Your holdings you're going to be a creditor. You're going to be hopping online with everybody else. Doesn't matter what you have in there. That's insane. And then they tried to soften it after the fact, where oh God, what is his name now? I can't think of the guy's name that runs the Coinbase. But he came out and said, oh well, we said that, but we didn't. That we had to say that because the government makes us say that, is basically what his justification was. But we can't expect, that's not a real possibility. Well, I'm sorry, sir, but the fact that the government makes you say it in your filings is because it is exactly a real possibility. Otherwise, they wouldn't make you say it, right? So I'm not saying that's going to happen. Anybody watching this, I don't want people to feel like they're in a panic. But gosh, if you are hearing this and you're not familiar with this news, and you have money, in your, Coinbase, I mean, you really want to think about doing something to try to, insulate yourself from something like that happening. I'm very concerned about that. And who knows how that will manifest. It would not surprise me if there's some kind of fabricated cyber attack, even on crypto markets. Another thing about Bitcoin, we don't have to beat this one to death, but this idea of the blockchain as this new novel technology. Blockchain technology has been with us since the 90s. We've not heard about blockchain through the 90s, through the aughts, into the teens, right? It's really just the last, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 years that we're really hearing blockchain, as if they just invented it. And it's just this really fascinating technology. It's been around. If it's so spectacular, why was it not employed for all these years? Or why have we not heard about any of this? Why did not the innovators that we're seeing now take advantage of this? And all of it just makes me really circumspect. So yeah, it's not a play I think I would indulge in. I think there's going to be a scramble to all the real stuff: real estate, land, real commodities. I mean, I know a guy who's got 2 tractors and he just bought a third. He bought a third tractor. He doesn't need a third tractor.
Right, because you can't get parts these days, right, for things even. So
it's just a value.
Yeah.
A place to put your money.
Well, what about the idea
guy's
of
buying a dump truck?
Right. Well, and yeah, everything is, the only thing is real is what is real, which is to say real estate products, even though they probably have some kind of depreciation, though we've seen in the case of used cars, them going up like crazy because new cars are not available, and that sort of thing. But and what is your thought on just the overall notion of a, quote unquote, democratic, a distributed ledger that's not owned by governments, not but is kind of a publicly visible, trustless system? Do you have thoughts on what a future currency system might look like? Is this a fool's errand to think that a technological solution wouldn't be commandeered by the powers that be? What's your thought on all that?
Well, I think that's the real concern, ultimately. So, I mean, I think anybody listening to this can probably get the flavor that you and I are libertarian in that sense, right? We don't want the centralized governance. We don't want this top-down control about all things currency. We don't want the powers that be meddling in all of our private transactions. I fully support anything that gets us out of that, whatever it is. So I would support any technology, any mechanism that actually favors our ability to transact privately and without that kind of interference. So I'm obviously in support of all of it. But my concern is, I think, the most obvious one, which is anything within the digital space, to me, is subject to manipulations and it's vulnerable. And I don't see how we could say otherwise. I mean, what are we looking at ultimately? Code? I mean, at the end of the day, isn't it just code? I just feel like I feel like we can dress it up as much as we want. We can talk about all these protections, but I mean, can we really think that we have powers in the way that in our ability to draft the code, to create the algorithms that can't be defeated by all the combined state powers? And if they I don't know. I mean, I would love to think otherwise, right? I'd be happy to.
Well, we know that quantum computers definitely have the capacity to break 256-bit encryption or whatever. They can, it's part of a longer conversation that we probably aren't going to tackle here today, but I would definitely like to continue to to explore with you and others, which is what is the nature of value, what and why is it that we've structured what we have here today? Who's it benefiting, and how could we revision that so that we're not strip mining the planet? It's like, why is taking gold out of the ground more valuable than leaving it in the ground, for example, outside of the, shall we say, outside of the industrial uses? We know gold has a lot of good uses, but why is it easier to why is it better to chop down a forest, or more financially viable in today's game A system, the competitor system, than it is to leave the forest there for future generations, for example? So we have kind of an upside down thing. I think where we're going is not going to be communism, it's not going to be socialism, but it's not going to be the form of capitalism that we're seeing now. I think is what, and people get really fearful about this, and I try to just say that, like a lot of other things in life, we've been handed this system. I don't know how far back you trace the system of capitalism. Some, trace it back to a few hundred years. Some trace it back to, to the Templars and the 12th, 13th, 14th century. And people leaving to go on crusades, and them having sort of, people hold their wealth in on some kind of document. It could go back a lot further if you're just thinking about currencies and debt that has been accrued in different systems. But it's a paradigm that we've been handed, and there's a lot of religiosity, and I say that with apologies to those who are religious, but there's a lot of fundamentalism in looking at the money system, and it's like it's not working. This is something Charles Hugh Smith talks a lot about. But we have to start revisioning that. How do you think, I guess a two-part question. What are you seeing as the likeliest scenario of our current financial system, and is it likely to crash and burn? If it does crash and burn, what is that going to look like? And then how do you think, short of giving our sovereignty over to the WEF, the Davos crowd, the WHO, the UN, whoever is claiming to speak for everybody, short of that, how do you see us revisioning and kind of rebooting a truer value-based currency system that can avoid some of the pitfalls, which is speculation, massive exploitation, massive accrual of wealth to the top 0.1%, and those kinds of issues. Obviously environmental desecration, despite some claims which I think are not accurate. But we can see that we do seem to be in the middle of the sixth extinction. We do seem to be in a pandemic of poisoning. That is a kind of an outcome of a paradigm that sees us as separate from nature, separate from each other. So I know that was a lot, but take it away. Whatever hits, whatever sticks to the wall out of any of that.
Well, so yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But I think so. Maybe it's a good place to start is the direction that we are being led by the people who are sort of in the power positions, right? So what's happening really at large? And at large, the system is ending, right? And it's not just the 40-year cycle, it's that 400-year cycle. It's the whole idea of there was feudalism, then there was mercantilism, and morphed into our present day kind of capitalism, right? That has now, and all the great analytical thinkers on the subject really opined on this. Marx, to me, was probably most uncanny in his ability, and he got a lot wrong. I mean, I think he misjudged the resilience of capital. I don't think he would have ever imagined the ability. He would have probably seen a workers' uprising a long time ago. But putting that aside, his perspicacity in understanding the road in which capital will move and where it ends up was absolutely spot on. I mean, it is eating its tail at this point. Everything is financialized, right? That's the very end of the system. And in the end of the system, we get kleptocrats. In fact, they know this too. And I'm putting my conspiratorial hat on, right? But I mean, Biden just recently was mocking us about it. He used the word clumsily enough. He had a hard time getting the word out of his mouth, but he was using the word kleptocracy. And I don't think that's by accident. I think they're well aware that they're all thieves at this point, stealing everything that's left. That's what happens, right? Everything becomes financialized. A lot of people are looking up at the sky lately and they're going, this doesn't look right. What's going on in the skies? Well, they too have been financialized, right? Everything. So at the end, that's where it goes. What the managerial class is attempting to do is to configure what comes next, right? It's a controlled demolition, which we're in the demolition phase. That seems pretty obvious. I mean, if you just look around what's going on in the world, you'd say, well, nothing's working, right? The supply chains, food distribution, harvesting, and I mean, everything is just a big, complete disaster, no matter where you look, right? So where are they going? Well, what's this new world order we're hearing about? It's not really new. It's old. It's feudalism, right? They're going back to feudalism. They're going back to the house of Tesla, the house of Microsoft, the house of Amazon. That's the road that they're taking. I think the best definition that I've heard that kind of describes the new world order that we're being kind of pushed into is technofeudalism. It's sort of a digital kind of grid that we're going to be kind of locked into, right? This is sort of where they want to take the society. The World Economic Forum we're hearing all about now, it's been around a while, but it didn't get a lot of buzz all these years. But the public-private partnership that we're hearing from time and time again is essentially describing global fascism. So for people who might be inclined to think that sounds really conspiratorial, I would invite them to go to the World Economic Forum, go to their website. And before you look at anything else, I just want you to look at the members. Before you go to that, and understand that it costs a lot of money to be a member of the World Economic Forum. It's not cheap. I think their highest subscription is like $700,000 a year. So it's just a lot of money, right? Look at who is a member. And I think that's all you need to know, because what you have to ask yourself is, okay, how could it not be the case that any organization, I don't care what they are, what they call themselves, that has a membership role, that is pretty much every major corporation in the world, every major sovereign in the world, almost all of the leaders of the West have circled through one of their programs, famously their Young Leaders program that they have. You have to stop and just ask and say, well, if I know nothing else, I can tell you that any entity that boasts this kind of membership has tremendous power. And look what we've just heard announced with the World Economic Forum and the United Nations signing a memorandum of understanding to expedite Agenda 2030. Well, who the hell is the World Economic Forum? Who the hell are they to sign anything? What is it's a private club? It makes no sense, right? But when your membership is pretty much everybody who's anybody, you call the shots, right? It's like Bill Gates in a way, right? Why does he get to go around and conduct interviews on all things public health when he himself has never even graduated college? What makes him a spokesperson for these subjects? Look, I have 7 years of post-high school education, and I can tell you, and from very good schools, and I can tell you that if I outed myself or presented myself as an authority on immunology or, public health, I would be very, very quickly shouted down as not an expert. I would be maligned, mocked, told to shut up. What do you know? You're a lawyer, right? This is what I would be told. Bill didn't even graduate college, and yet he's going around, so but I think what they're doing, in essence, is a psychological kind of operation, which is to get us to accept this, even though they don't have an authority to do it. There's no imprimatur to get the United States and its citizens to sign on to anything. They can go through the motions, and if we just assume it's a done deal, well, then they're just going to pretend everything was done the way it's all above board. But there's no authority, for example, for anyone in the United States to sign over our sovereignty on health decisions to the WHO. The world, right? It doesn't exist. There's nobody in the United States capable of delegating that authority. They can try. They could sign their name to a piece of paper and bang a gavel and that kind of stuff. But that doesn't convey any authority on them to do any of it, right? What they're hoping, I'm thinking, is that it'll be done. And then psychologically, we will accept it as having been done. Oh, they did this. I can't believe they did this. Well, could they do it with gun rights too? Could they just have an international treaty? You see what I mean? They'll just do it with everything.
Yeah, that's what they've been doing with masks, with vaccines, with this, that, and the other thing. It's not really ending. But you're right. It's like well. So this begs the question. This is something we've talked about, and to what degree are they expecting us to take this seriously? Is this some kind of LARP that they're leading us down a sort of a primrose path? Because admittedly, it's getting more and more ridiculous, the things that they're attempting to do, and yet you see the Congress largely going along with it as if if it's the right thing to do, whether it's funding for another 40 billion for Ukraine. I guess it was Rand Paul that seems to have put a little bit of a delay on that. One can imagine that delay won't last all that long. And of course, we've got Jankowicz and the I can't even say with a straight face. The Disinformation Governance Board, a.k.a. Ministry of Truth. So, but so just going back to that point, I mean, are we to take these things seriously? If we don't take them seriously, what is the downside of that? But is it leading us into another agenda? Is this craziness not to be taken seriously or to be taken seriously? What are your thoughts on this crazy time, the upside down world, and how we respond to it?
Yeah, clown world indeed. Right. No, it is waxing more and more ridiculous. I mean, I think the example of the Mistress of Truth with the new, Disinformation Governance Board, is probably the best prime example of just how silly. And there's the videos of her floating around with these little song and dances and stuff. And she fancies herself a performer, I guess, and she has a decent voice, but it's completely absurd. I mean, the inappropriateness of it alone is, to me, it was akin to a firing squad coming out and doing a little jig before they execute somebody. Just the utter inappropriateness of it, given the context of what we're looking at. It's, to me, but to your point, and I think it's an excellent question, right? Are we supposed to be taking this seriously, or is this just supposed to be incendiary to just get us to be so fed up? And I suspect that it might be the latter, that they really ultimately want to get us to be begging for some kind of solution, right? Something that will come on offer that we're going to say, oh, yes, this is what we need, and we're willing to, do the things that they would consider to be necessary, like digital ID, vaccine passports, or whatever,
universal basic income, etc. Although we did have this conversation yesterday, which is related, which is how are they expecting us to take it seriously if somebody like Klaus Schwab is the putative face of this? Because at least for us in the West, I have to say it's a bias that's built in because of all the movies that we were exposed to with kids, from Hogan's Heroes on up, but just listening to him talk, I mean, it's right out of a James Bond movie, and it's very hard to take that seriously. So how are they realistically expecting us to buy into whatever agenda they're going to do, or they're going to try, or they continue to try? I mean, they are rolling out passports here and there, although depending on the country and the state, those are being pushed back. I just heard that the UK said that passports will not be required now to get into certain functions and stuff like that. So there are some benefits, but you're seeing this kind of rollback of rights. It's this chipping away, and I'm sure you notice, like I do, it's like every day there's like 10 little chips, and you can imagine that good people will stand up and say no to that, but you wonder, after 10 days you get 100, after 100 days you get 1,000 little chippings away. Is anything we do in the long run going to be able to push this thing out of the way? At what point do we rise up? And as you said, does that rising up then play into the hands of the Davos crowd? Because they can say, see, we agree with you that these leaders that you have are leading you down the primrose path, or they're not helping you. So we have a good solution for you.
I mean, it's an excellent point that some of these figures, and Klaus Schwab, I think, is a great example. Boris Johnson comes to mind as another example. These buffoonish, bizarre, like Klaus is right out of the pages of a comic book. I mean, he's absolutely a stereotypical villain. And you made the comment yesterday in our private conversation about that might be a very kind of Western-centric sort of position. I think I understand that. But I don't think he could be an accident. I don't think that his, even the fact that he's been seen depicted in his like rather like futuristic or demonic kind of outfit that he's been seen in. So much of it is just so bizarre and just so, you know, comic book like, that it's hard to believe, right? And I can't help but feel like this is all part of the psychology of control. Um, where it goes, I'm not sure. And so whether by that I mean, are we going to be introduced to a cast of characters that we've not seen yet, that are going to be much more reasonable, that will at least appear to be genuinely on our side and genuinely have the people's interest at heart and humanity at heart, and that they will ultimately be who we gravitate towards to lead us into the next thing? I'm not so sure. You know, one of the things that I think is very scary to me, that, and I don't think it gets enough discussion, is that a lot of the solutions that are being proposed by these individuals, and I think a lot of the general public are beginning to catch on to this, and I'm talking about just rank and file people, they won't work. They can't work. And it makes you wonder, okay, well, if all of these things that we're supposed to be, you know, accepting this massive level of change for, like the climate as an example, and all the attendant changes that need to happen in order to save the climate, right? And all these solutions. Well, I'll give you a good example of one I just heard recently. We have a problem with a diesel shortage now, you're probably hearing, right? And for those who aren't aware, the world runs on diesel. When I say the world, I quite literally mean everything runs on diesel that's needed, all the equipment. Given the fact that we have a diesel shortage, they're taking diesel refineries offline and they're converting the refineries to generate biofuel. Well, biofuel largely comes from, guess what? Food oils. Okay? How the hell do you get food without diesel? You don't. It can't work, and it won't work. You know, electric cars are not a solution for anything. They may cut down general pollution. I don't disagree with that, right? You're just, you know, you'd have less smog and the attendant effects of carbon monoxide flowing out of automobiles, but they're not a solution. If you don't believe me, just do a little research on what it takes to mine lithium, which is required for their batteries, and look what it does to the earth to get the lithium. It's not sustainable. The idea that we could have, you know, 500,000 charging stations around the, you know, the country. Well, I would ask the question, from what source of energy is most of the world's electricity derived from? And the answer is coal, good old coal. Is coal, you know, good for the environment to burn to get the electricity? You know, they talk about nuclear. Charles Hugh Smith talks about this, not recently, but not that long ago. You don't have enough. We have 1/100th of what we would need for nuclear power. We have 1/100th of it. We don't have anywhere near. Now, I would remind people, and most everybody listening to this has heard of these things: 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. We don't have that many nuclear power plants in the world. And we've had how many catastrophes with what we've had? This doesn't mean I'm necessarily down on nuclear power, but it's a very, very unstable energy source. And if things go wrong, brother, they really go wrong with nuclear power plants. I mean, you're talking about, you know, could be catastrophic damage. I mean, Chernobyl is probably the best example. I mean, that, you know, we all know that story, right? Well, imagine the exposure that we have if we were to even try to get the amount of nuclear power plants that we would need online to do it. It's not possible anyway. We would have to be getting nuclear power plants online like once a week for the next 20 years. Yeah, I mean, it's a non-starter. And so I say this because it's really important that people stop and critically think about what we're being told. And we have to ask, like, what is it? What world are they getting ready for? Well, if none of the solutions actually could work, and I have to assume they know that they won't work. So what does that mean? What does that tell us about who they are and the direction that they're really moving in? Is there really a plan? Is the grand reset and all these comic book villains, are they there just for the psychological purpose of getting us all discombobulated so we're not really thinking clearly? And in the meantime, it's just grift. It's just steal as much as possible, rape as many resources as possible. When the system just tanks, they're the ones who are going to be holding all of the assets that humans need, so they'll have leverage. They might not even know today the extent of that leverage, how they plan to employ it, how it'll work, but they'll know that they own the farmlands, they own the equipment, and that gives them the power to negotiate with everybody else. This, I assume, is, what could be the case, which doesn't, it's kind of a scary proposition, right? It's sort of like, is it worse to have no plan or their great reset plan is kind of the question that raises. And I'm not so sure I know the answer to that, but I'm not going to live a slave in their digital, their little digital prison. So, and I think a lot of people would feel the same way. So I suspect that it might be a lot worse than we realize in terms of what we're facing as a civilization.
Well, it's hard to face, and this is something that we've, I think, pointed out quite a bit in the past, as far as normies waking up, which is just admitting the idea that people in power, I don't want to say in control exactly, but people in power who see themselves as in power, the Davos set, the bankers at military industrial complex, pharma cartel, big tech cartel, big oil cartel, all those folks, they do not, but the government in particular does not have our best interests in mind. And if you ever wondered, if people ever wondered about it, you've got to look at the masking in the mRNA shots, which despite the obvious that they were never, they had no long-term testing, which should have been all we needed to know on the rollout, never mind the suppression of therapeutics writ large, and zero conversation really about about the natural immune system capacity or innate immunity, herd immunity, all that stuff being on the fly, actively reconfigured and redefined on the WHO, CDC website, on Wikipedia. It's like this massive campaign that it's hard to imagine, and one doesn't want to be depressed or feel that the world is against them, but certainly at least some crust of it seems to be working on a depopulation agenda, which would make some of the control that you're talking about more possible. I mean, just look at the latest revelations from the Pfizer document dumps, which we already actually knew about. There's really nothing new there, but about the contraindications for pregnant and breastfeeding women, including pregnant and breastfeeding women who are simply partners with somebody who's had the shot. And so that brings out the shedding thing that people were talking about. And we were all told we were crazy conspiracy theorists. So that's that is an element of what is going on. And again, this tectonic intersection or crashing really of paradigms. This one paradigm of winner take all, which is the political paradigm, the financial paradigm, which is a paradigm of separation, where I see, and I'm happy to see, my benefit as being separate and different from yours, and where my winning comes at the cost of your losing. This is in their mind, versus, I think, an emerging paradigm that has yet to really find its legs, but is, I think, scrambling to do so, which is, working for the best benefit of all, understanding our relationship to nature, to creation, if you will, and just trusting the body, finding a way to trust each other. Trust is not our long suit right now in the culture. Yet I have to say, on the positive side, Frank, that folks like us would not have found each other absent this craziness that's gone on for the last couple of years. I came from the progressive side. I don't feel like I'm not progressive, but I feel like the left left me. People from libertarians and conservatives and others that we are now having common cause with. And it feels to me like, in this tectonic shift, we are finding a new common ground that may well offer us the basis for which we can stand up collectively and say, there's some basic things here that we have to agree on. In other words, we have to be able to see beyond the, oh my God, the abortion thing. Oh, not to say that that it isn't important in people's things, but the racism, the abortion, all the things that are, the culture war stuff, all the things that are being trucked out, keep us fighting each other. And I keep saying that, that's not really where the fight needs to be. We need to find what it is that we share in common. Understand that there are a hierarchy of values and that there are some basic things that if we don't insist on, we're just all going to go over the cliff together. And by that, I mean, combination of economics and what we're doing to the environment. I'm not talking about climate change. I'm talking about the mass poisoning and, the things like climate change. I'm not saying there isn't something going on there, but to reduce it to a single molecule like carbon. And Charles Eisenstein had a very good conversation with RFK Jr. about this recently. It's like, it's keeping everyone at odds, and there's a fundamentalism, a reductionism, and a scientific materialism that I think is that they've used to try to take over the narrative and really kind of capture people's minds. And it's part and parcel of what we could consider to be modern college education, and culture war stuff now taking over nonprofits, governments, corporations now pushing these things, which makes you understand that a lot of that is not organic. It's simply not organic. And it flies in the face of where we need to go. It's hard to see how we're going to get to that saner place when there seems to be this bifurcation of values. But we do need to, I think, continue to speak into and for this deeper, maybe call it 0 level or 1 level value system of freedom and nature and natural systems, natural law, building trust, and actively questioning and pushing back against the divide and conquer strategies that are on offer, that continue to be on offer, that don't seem to go away. And we've all been, I know, kind of chuckling in a rueful way about the next thing to be all up in arms about. Well, now it's Ukraine. Oh, now it's abortion. Oh, now it's like constantly being look at the shiny new thing, get up in arms about it. Yeah, I'd like to see us move in that direction of having those core conversations, because I do see a deeper set of values that are bringing us together. I know in our communities here in the state of New Hampshire, and not just ours, but around the country and around the world. But it seems like there's some more territory to take for us to see that we do have common cause, and to be able to put down, at least for the moment, these issues that they would like to use to divide us, and that we are, if we latch onto them, agreeing to use to divide us from others. And it's like, I want to say, no, I reject that, at least as an a priori stance for thinking that my good is separate from your good or anybody else's good in my community. And I think it's maybe what the controllers don't or can't predict is that in their use of chaos in the current systems, that they may bring us together like nothing else ever did. If we start to have food shortages, if the issues around diesel and trucking and heating and how we run, our systems all goes away, we're going to have to really rely on each other in the way we've never seen. Now, one could easily imagine a dystopic vision on that, but I'd like to say, and I'd like to, put out to people that it's the story that we tell ourselves and the imaginations that we entertain, in our quiet moments as to what is actually happening and what we can do about it, that are actually generative of the future that we have. So are we being handed a future? It seems that way, but are we also sovereign, and are we able to choose the future that we want? Yes, but I don't think it's going to just come to us on a silver platter. I think we have to stand up for it. We have to stand for it, and we have to articulate what that is, which is why, what is value? What is money? What is the basis of life and this value system that we find ourselves in? How can we reinvent and recreate and reaffirm the common basis of life and life value, and say no to what's not working? How do we do that collectively?
Yeah, I mean, those are very excellent points. It begs the question a little bit of intentionality too, right? Because it seems as if we're being subjected to all of this sort of incendiary content coming from the top down. You alluded to the mistress of truth, and now there's this, office of was it environmental justice now, and all these Orwellian dystopian kinds of things that's driving people away from the systems in droves. I mean, look at the public school nightmare. I think I was saying this to you the other day. I think it's over 15% now drop in enrollment for pre-K and kindergarten across the country as a national average. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but let me tell you something, brother, that is astronomical. I mean, that's a huge, huge number. So it kind of begs the question, what's the intention? I mean, it almost supports the thesis that this is done really for incendiary purposes. In other words, I use the analogy of throwing our children in the river so we get busy pulling them out of the water while the thieves skip town with our money, and we're just simply too busy to notice, right? If they were really trying to cajole the public into some kind of new way of some kind of new way of social existence. The old adage that you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, right? Like, why are they making this so dubious and evil and just so over the top? What kind of reaction would they expect the public at large to have? I mean, why would we gravitate to a Klaus Schwab? Why would we want to gravitate to somebody who's literally telling people your humanity is worth shit? It makes no sense. We're not going to go run to that guy. Oh, thank you. You sound like a savior to me. I'm just eat the bugs. Who wants that? Like, I'm sure that there's a segment of the population that's always going to just kind of do whatever officialdom says is recommended, right? There's always that. But they are not the majority of people. If you ask the majority of people about some of these issues, they'll say the same thing we'll say. Oh, they're ridiculous. They're not. They might not live and breathe these issues like you and I do, But if cornered, if asked, they'll say, "Yeah, that's disinformation governance board. Come on, most people will go, get out of here. Like, this is so stupid. Like, but they're doing it." And they're floating around her little stupid video with her Mary Poppins tune. What, for what end? Like you say, is it just to get us to be tackling each other? Roe v. Wade? I mean, you blew the dust off of that one for this. I mean, really? Like, I don't know. It certainly looks like we're being massively distracted from what is the greatest wealth transfer in human history. And I really think at the end of the day, that's the only thing they give a shit about. Follow the money. Just follow the money. It doesn't steer you wrong. It'll take you to the source.
And that's what Ukraine's all about. Let's be honest. It's just, when they say, well,
$40 billion,
we'll send 40 billion to Ukraine. Well, what does that really mean? We all know what that means. And Noam Chomsky has talked about this for decades, even though I think recently he's missed the mark on a few things like the pandemic. But, he said that's just that's just welfare for corporations, because all that money goes back into the military-industrial complex. That's really where it goes. It's it's buying more bombs and more things that really don't have a life value. To borrow John McMurtry's term, they don't have a life code value. It's not, you can build a bomb, but what does a bomb do? It blows things up, so it has actually a negative value. It's like, it's like including all the illnesses that have to be paid for in our medical system as part of GDP. Oh, look at this, we have this great GDP. No, that's a measure of malarkey. It's a measure of negativity. It's not a measure of life. It's not a measure of health. So we need to kind of revision this entirely. So yeah, I don't know if we have clarity, but it does seem that it does seem to go back to your point of, are they distracting us? I think they think they're distracting us. I think that's what they would like to do. But if we judge even, by things that we can see and we can know in terms of truth coming out that can't be hidden, that's slowly starting to gain acceptance. We know that because, like, initially when the pandemic first hit, you couldn't talk about it coming from a biolab. That was verboten, and you would just be canceled off of every social media platform. But now, now the New York Times and the Washington Post, well, maybe it did, 2 years later, we can, start talking about it. If we take a look at how many people are not signing up for additional boosters, now it looks like that whole system, now looks like it's more than half of the people are not signing up for this continued thing. So that's, to me, a very positive thing. Yes, I think we can get caught in things, but think about, I'm trying to think of this. This is a group at Princeton, can't remember their name, but they did a study a number of years ago about how many bills that went through Congress were actually in response to the needs of the people versus a moneyed group, private groups or corporate lobbyists. And it was just like zero, almost zero, like that was actually serving the people. And we can admit that, we can see that, and to sort of get, address your point of, people seeing it and going, yeah, well, whatever. It's like we have been in this system for decades now. One could argue for maybe hundreds of years, but certainly in a visible way. And when I say in a visible way, since the era of mass communication, and even more so since the internet era. So we're really only talking about, less than 30 years. If you think of internet era sort of starting in 1995. We are now able to see things as we've never been able to before, despite massive attempts at censorship. And I think that's part of why they're attempting to do that, along with maybe other reasons. But it comes down to this, I think, is we've lived in a world where we've more or less taken things for granted. Whether it's school, whether it's being able to go down to the corner shop and get things, that we need without thinking about where they come from. And that system is going away. So yes, you got to get the kids out of the river, but one could argue we've needed to get the kids out of the river for a long time. We've just not seen how toxic that river has been. And now with children, 54% of children developing a chronic disease of some kind by the time they're 18 now. Isn't that the pandemic that we should be facing? So we've come out of this kind of social paralysis of, like, just accepting things as they are. And I would love to live in a world where we could accept things as they are, because we're all working for the best benefit and we're not, trying to kill ourselves. But that's not the world we've lived in. So it's a slow, or maybe a more rapid burn now of awakening. And we can't take things for granted, and it's going to be hard. And it's going to get worse, I think, because I can still go down to Market Basket and get almost anything I want. Now they're signaling that that's going to change within 6 months, and I know in different parts of the world it has already changed. But this is a wake up moment. And it's not just waking up. It's not just red pilling. That's a necessary step. It's not a sufficient step. It is a necessary step for us to then, come to the town square, face each other, look, say, hey, what are you seeing? And then not just what are you seeing, but then what are you wanting? where do we go from here? What is the basis for our common understandings about what's real, what's true, what's valuable, what's beautiful, what's good, and then how can we reaffirm or recreate that common understanding, whether it's looking again at the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, whether it's integrating other things in terms of how we agree to deal with each other on a daily basis, like rules of conversation. How do we treat each other with respect, nonviolent, or compassionate communication? We need to reboot this because we can't come to a new place and start having these what I would call generative future building conversations unless we have a sense of what's actually going on, because you can't treat a patient if you don't know what's making the patient sick. We can't begin to address the complexities of our current situation unless we know what's happening and why they're coming that way. And those answers are not necessarily simple and reductionistic. And then B, we can't build something new if we're fighting each other, right? And if we don't have a common respect. And so much of what goes now for human interaction is one-upping and people destroying other people, they destroyed this person. It's all a LARP at one level, but to the extent that we allow this pattern to manage or to inform or infect our social relations, we lose, because we're not going to get anywhere. So how can we come to the town square? That's my question. How can we come to the town square? And the town square is not simply a metaphor, but I think it's probably in the coming times a real thing, because it's going to all politics are local. Hey, if we have food shortages, it's going to be people locally who are searching for food or are dying from lack thereof, as they're dying now from that in a way that's almost invisible from the poisoning that's happening at whatever level, whether it's at the point of a needle or whether it's from GMOs or other things. We are in mass poisoning. So I'll leave you to make the last comment before we close.
No, again, some excellent remarks there. I think it's encouraging, for example, on the point of at the point of a needle, right? The participation on the vaccine participation since the initial injections has dropped like off a cliff. I mean, nobody's doing it, and even the people I know that went out and got vaccinated, there's nobody's going back for more that I know. My parents did, but they're 90, and it's like I don't blame them. With the boosters and that kind of thing. That's encouraging because it suggests that people are at a minimum becoming more aware of all of the environmental concerns with these things like, the vaccines and the food crisis and all this stuff that's happening. Because I think the intention is, as you say, to get us to be so acrimonious with each other that we'll never be able to coalesce around anything. Because remember what we're about to face, I think, or what they're going to attempt, which is to get us very, very desperate. So that people will, similar to the people who felt so desperate that they had to take an injection they did not want so that they could, secure their employment, which is ironic because most of the employment is at will and they can lose their job for any reason or no reason at the whim of their employer anyway, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But, I think they're going to do the same thing with things like the food supply. I mean, the people who are really going to be crunched by this we're going to be at each other's throats about whatever solution is on order, right? People like you and I will say, I don't trust these fuckers. We can't let them, and then there's going to be people going, are you nuts? Like we have to do it. You're going to kill us all. Does that sound familiar? Right. I think that's the game that's going to be played, but there's going to be a different psychological mindset of the public now than there was even before. It seems as if the little thread that's been dangling that a lot of people have ignored for so many years, people are now jumping up and grabbing it and just pulling it down to show sort of what's behind that curtain. People are asking that question now. They didn't always do that. They kind of want to know. I mean, even going all the way back to Kennedy, I mean, a lot of people now are bringing that up again, as if that had something to do with what's happening now. Well, guess what? It damn well does. Of course it does. Kennedy's crime was messing with the money. That was his crime. He messed with the money. Again, follow the money. People say, well, the Cuban and this, a lot of issues. He messed with the money. You don't mess with the money. They had to make a choice. We either let this guy steer us in this other direction, which is not going to be good for, Captain Global, or, get rid of it. And then, with the famous shot of Johnson at the airport, winking over at Senator, whatever his name is, a president was just killed. You got his bloody, sobbing wife. Say, what in God's name could be so, would provoke a wink and a smile in that? If a picture doesn't say it, 1,000 words, man. I mean, there it is, right? Same people then as now, different generation of them. And they're just doing their little maneuvering. So, they end up on top when this all comes crashing down. They can't control everything. They know that. They're going to do what they can to try to, position themselves as, the buyers and lenders of last resort and the ones. But there's a lot of ways in which we absolutely can be empowered. The trick, I think, to your point, is going to create cohesion amongst populations, and it's going to be a relocalization. And people are being driven now to that, just out of necessity. I mean, a lot of people are now coalescing around new friendships that are based on truths and not lies. And unfortunately, you're seeing a lot of older friendships and familiar relations sever and suffer because, the minds just don't, there's just not a meeting of the minds anymore, so we're gravitating towards each other in this new reality. But it's growing, right? People like us are growing in number. We're not decreasing in number. And I think that's a positive thing. And so we have to just keep, doing what we need to do to insulate ourselves at the local level, which is really where it all is going to come down to, I think. And who knows? I mean, we may even live through a separation of a breakup of the country at some point if it keeps going in this direction, which maybe wouldn't be so bad. It's a really big country. Maybe wouldn't be such a big deal to have different, independent regions that can kind of control things the way the people would prefer. But that's not going to come easily.
Well, you may be right. I mean, that is actually consistent with a liberal ethos in the best sense of that word, which is live and let live. Let people find their own place and their own level, and don't force people to live in a way that they don't want to. But also, I think if there's any role that government, quote unquote, government could play, would be just to make sure that people aren't stepping on other people's freedoms and rights. I think for almost everything else, they should just get it out of the way. But those freedoms and rights, do have to include the freedom, or the right, I should say, to have clean water, clean air, clean food, and that's certainly not been the modus operandi of those in control. And so there's going to be a very big come to Jesus moment, come to the truth moment for a lot of people, and for us to really be able to step up on a larger stage, I would say, and in a larger or more engaged conversation around goodness, beauty, truth, and the conceptions of the moral life and natural law, because it's not going to happen all by itself. It's only going to happen when enough of us stand up and say no more to that. Like 65% of the country said no more to vaccines, to the COVID vaccines, according to this article I had just up at the screen by New York Times and some other data from CDC and this Merrill Nass's assessment of what's going on. So I think that's the good news, and that's, I think, where we can leave it today. It's
sure,
stuff's coming apart, but good news is that people are getting red pilled, and we're finding each other in odd corners of the internet and the local cafes, and let's just keep this conversation going. Let's keep talking about ways that we can make it work. And I really appreciate your time today, Frank, and the different conversations that we've had in trying to shed light on what is going on, and more and better yet, what sense we can make of it so that we can craft a better future for ourselves.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the world in which they envision, the central planners, is antithetical to the basic human tenets and desires that we all have, even if we're not reflecting on them. And this is why they will lose ultimately, because they have not conditioned the public or haven't programmed that out of the public at this point. There's too many people that once awareness is brought to it, you can't eradicate that out of humanity. They would like to do that, but that's not possible. Maybe they're pushed towards this transhumanistic environment that they keep talking about. That's sort of, I think, where they're going, right? Because that's sort of where they would love to be able to go, but that's not what most people, feel. And that's why I think that they're vulnerable big time. And, we're doing the right thing. Great talking again, JM.
All right, Frank, really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, you too, brother.